Rick, you've actually said on the show before that you thought that Luger came back for a huge contract, but Eric wrote in his book that really wasn't the case. What's your guys' perspective on that? And I mean, Eric's debunked a lot of WCW myths so far. What was the situation with Luger coming back? Longtime fans remember his contract was up with WWF at the time, but they didn't know that he would be making an appearance on Nitro because it was just by a day or so. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, and I don't, obviously I wasn't on the WWF side of the equation, and, Bruce Pritchard and I have done a lot of shows together where we, kind of debate the Monday Night War, him from his perspective as one of Vince's top guys, in the kind of creative side of things and operation sides of things, and then, of course, me on the other. So it's an interesting take, and I've actually learned a lot. Each time I do one of these with Bruce, I learned, a little bit of something new. But based on what I understand, Luger's contract was up. I believe Vince thought that he had a verbal agreement, or if it wasn't Vince, it was somebody else, that was high up in the food chain, believed that they had a handshake or at least an understanding with Lex, and Lex knew he was coming to WCW. From my perspective, and that's how, Lex was able to make that move and surprise everybody on the WWE side. From my perspective, I've learned a lot. I'm still learning every day. I learn something at 60, and one of the things I've learned about myself and tried to get better at is forgiving things and people and myself as well. And I want to say that about Lex Luger because I resented him really up until the last year or two. I had a lot of resentment towards him because of what happened with Elizabeth. My wife was very friendly with Elizabeth and Janie Angle, and she used to come out to our place here in Wyoming and go fishing and things. So when Elizabeth died, it affected me, and it didn't affect me as much, but it affected my perspective on Lex. And I held on to that for a long time, and like I said, up until about a year or two ago, and finally just got over it. But even long before that, when I was just an announcer, and I was a third-string announcer that just batted cleanup for Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone, that was my role, and I was grateful for that role. And I didn't really interact with Lex all that much. I did occasionally. I would do an interview with him and things like that. But I watched Lex, and he was very arrogant, and I don't think he meant it, really. I don't think he thought of himself as highly as he came off. I understand things better now. But the vibe that he gave me, and probably a lot of other people, is that he was so full of himself. Like that narcissist gimmick that he went to the WWE with wasn't a stretch for him. There was not a lot of acting involved there, really.
Yeah. No, I'm just going to comment for 1 second. You're accurate. That was it used to drive everybody crazy. I mean, it didn't affect me because I was the guy that was getting them over. And he was easy to work with. But everybody was mad at me because I had to do such ridiculous stuff with him in lieu of the fact that he hadn't learned how to wrestle that well, which is kind of the deal with Bill Goldberg. They didn't have to learn how to really work because they were put in a position. And as in my role, they're looking at me and going, he's in the main event with you tonight. You got to draw a house. So I'm going to go out there and do whatever I can do. Because, I'm trying to feed myself, but I'm trying to feed everybody else on the card. You get what I'm saying, Eric, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and he always respected me, but I won't mention names. He had everybody upside down because he talked about himself in the third person. You can't say to Jack Mulligan, why would a Lex Luger put over a Dutch Mantel? Why would he even wrestle Dutch Mantel? I don't know. You're lucky Mulligan didn't swat you.
Well, and for me, when Lex left, it was like good riddance. I never. Again, this is me personally now, more than professionally. But personally, when I say that, I mean as someone who just liked to watch the product and loved the wrestling side of things. I didn't think Lex. I just didn't see it in him. I didn't think I never liked watching him as a performer. I didn't, and part of it was probably because I didn't like him as a person. But to me, it didn't mean much. So when he left, it was like good riddance. Glad he's not on my hands. I'll be somewhere else. But it wasn't one of who I do, and to this day, have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for. But then I was working with Sting, every day. And we had a good relationship. And still do to this day. We're not close by any stretch. I'll talk to him, but if I see him or when I worked with him, in the past, always good relationship. But at that time, Sting and Ric Flair were two, that was it. And, obviously Hulk there, but I listened to Sting and Rick as much as I listened to anybody at that time. And Sting was tight with Lex. Sting saw that part of Lex that, a lot of us didn't see. And Sting came to me and said, man, Lex is available. He'd really like to come back. And it was almost painful for me because I didn't want to shut Sting down, but in my mind, I was thinking, I'd rather take an ice pick to my thigh than have a conversation with this guy about coming back. That's how I felt. But I took a meeting out of respect for Sting and support for him. Took a meeting or two with Lex, and I said, okay, I'm going to make him an offer. And this is the truth. And Lex has even referred to this in his own interview. So if any of your listeners don't believe me, they can Google and hear it from Lex himself. But after a first meeting or two, maybe, I don't remember, and it was a very secretive thing. We met at Lex's house, at Sting's house. He had a little apartment above his garage, and we met in. Nobody knew we were there. And I said, okay, I'm going to make this guy an offer that I hope he turns down. And I don't remember what Luger was making when he left WCW. I think he was probably around $750 or something like that, or $500 or something. I don't remember at the time. I offered him $150,000. I said, okay, if you want to come back, here's $150,000. And I knew that it was so much less than what he was making. I knew it. And that was going to be my out. It's like, sorry, Sting, I offered him what I could afford, and he turned it down. Instead of just flat out saying no. And Luger accepted it. And then it was okay. Because of course Lex told me that he's changed. He understood, what he did wrong, and he wanted to prove himself. He said it to me. He wanted to prove himself. I thought, well, you know what? He's putting his money, so to speak, where his mouth is, because he's walking away from $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 that he's getting or could get potentially from WWE, and he's placing a bet on himself, and that appealed to me. And I went, okay, let's see if we can make this work. I went from being kind of hoping he would turn me down to thinking, okay, now that I've got him, how do we make this work? And then it just kind of all came together. The timing actually created the opportunity more than any real vision.
Yeah, well, let me just throw something in there. When I was going to mention this yesterday in relation to Scott and Kevin as well. Until you've worked that schedule up there,
yeah.
It never affected me because I can't be on the road enough. I don't care what's going on, especially when the crowds are big and you're wrestling guys you like to work with. So my experience there is always great. And Eric, you know the deal. You walk into an arena with 10,000 people every day. It's not hard to perform. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But the schedule is ridiculous. It is. And when Eric said he cut back on house shows, he cut way back. So here you're walking back into an environment where you're home at least a couple days a week.
Right.
We used to go. Their schedule. Because I talked to. Well, I had all kinds of friends up there, but where I was the NWA World Champion, I'm gone 6, 7, 8 weeks at a time. Never back home in Charlotte. Right, traveling around the country, the world. Right. Well, those guys are out 65, 70 days. Just like I was. That schedule in the 80s was insane up there, Eric. You know that, right?
Yep.
And consequently, which is a personal issue, and people have nobody to blame but themselves, a lot of bad habits are established on a personal level that cause problems, health issues. And I'm in total. I get along great with Lex now, and he's a very humble person. I can't say anything but good things about him. I felt terrible. I actually felt terrible for him because I know what he went through with his family and all that. It was not a good time or hard time for him. And but those social habits that everybody, it's wrestling. Well, bullshit. It's not wrestling. Attorneys, everybody do things they want to do. Doctors,
sure.
Right? It's always saying those darn wrestlers, right? They've got all this stuff going on, and that's not the case. But when you're working 70 days in a row, you know, and you're going to find recreation, man. Me, I did, but I didn't go that way. But I had fun. I mean, like I tell everybody, I hurt myself between 11 and 2 in the morning, depending on what city, 11 and 4 or 5. My life's an open book, man. But I didn't